Welcome. Welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Wednesday, January the 12th, and I'm glad that we have this opportunity to spend this morning together. Woke up this morning and it was about 2 degrees outside. So, for those of you who are calling in from or watching from other places in the country, I hope it's a little bit warmer, but it's still a pretty sun-filled sky, so can't complain. And and so we get an opportunity to do this again this morning. Hope you had a really good night's sleep, waking up feeling refreshed. I'm excited about this new year, about all the ministry opportunities that I'm looking forward to, and as well as these studies. I learn a great deal just going through these passages, and consider it a privilege to have this opportunity to just open up the Word with you each and every day. We've been recently in a new study, right, on the Sermon on the Mount. It's just a progression in our look through the Gospel of Matthew. And as we're looking through this passage together, one of the things that we're learning, right, is how Matthew has laid out this gospel for us. One of the things that we see in the text is that Matthew has begun to divulge for us in the opening chapters of the book something about who Jesus is. He is the Messiah that God had promised. And that Messiah has far-reaching implications because it was part of God's plan always, right? To bring one who would be a redeemer to accomplish for us what we could not do on our own. Time and time again throughout history, we have seen how mankind has always fallen short. From the days of God creating a world and watching men fall into rebellion, to trying to rescue that world through Noah and seeing how that too has failed, raising up Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and realizing how each and every one of those all fall short. Moses bringing people into a promised land, and how that falls short, and just on the list goes. And after a while, you begin to recognize that what we really need is this Messiah, this Redeemer who would come and rescue men from their sin. And that was always the promise, right, that God had been creating. You go way back to just in the early chapters of Matthew, when references are made to where this child would be born, or what he would do. He shall be called Jesus, right? For he shall save his people from their sins. Or you should call him Emmanuel, God with us. So many of these titles. He will, they come and worship the Savior for all mankind. So there is in this person of Jesus then one who promises to draw near and to bring this promised redemption that God is bringing. So now Jesus steps onto center stage, and now we're going to be able to hear more and more from Jesus himself. And what a great opportunity we have in Matthew chapters 5 through 7, because as we go through Matthew 5 through 7, it's as if you were invited into a seminar on what it means to be a part of the kingdom of heaven. Let me just, just bring us up to speed a little bit on some basic assumptions. One, Jesus has gone out to preach about the kingdom of heaven and what that kingdom and its implications are for those who are living in this world. The other thing that you find with Jesus is that Jesus is beginning now to draw disciples unto himself. So it's not enough for him to go teaching in the synagogues and preaching about this good news and healing. He's also calling people into a relationship with himself, because from the very beginning, from the garden itself, when God created Adam and Eve, he created Adam and Eve so Adam and Eve would what? Would begin to work this land, to work all of this creation that God had placed before them. They would they were to be fruitful and multiply, but they were also to subdue the earth and to rule over it. And the point that I'm making is just that God has always incorporated humanity into this work that he was doing. You and I become fellow workers with God in this whole work of redemption. So it's not unusual that when Jesus begins his public ministry, what does he do? He starts calling people to himself and as apprentices to learn more and more about what it means to be a part of this kingdom of heaven. So we have the early four, right? You have Andrew and Peter, James and John. And this is before, like in chapter 10, you're going to realize that Jesus is going to call the 12 apostles. And those 12 are also representative, right, of those 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus is coming to the house of Israel first, and the ongoing widening expansion of this kingdom is going to incorporate, Gentiles, people from every tribe, nation, and tongue. And we get to be a part of that really great work. So Jesus comes preaching the kingdom. Jesus brings his disciples close to him. And now he begins to tell them a little bit about what it looks like in this kingdom. And he begins by giving us a portrait of what it really looks like to be well off. And it starts off with the Sermon on the Mount in what we know as the Beatitudes. And so what I'd like to do for you again is perhaps just to take a moment and read for you from Matthew chapter 5, and we can begin here at verse 3. So we're looking at Matthew chapter 5 and beginning at verse 3. It says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." When we read this text in its entirety, it becomes obvious, right, that this world in which we're living is not heaven. And no matter how much we strive to make this heaven, it will never be heaven. It's not the place where all of God's work is going to be fully realized. We live in a broken world that is under judgment. You see that in the decay that takes place in creation itself. You see it the way it affects our bodies. You see it in terms of our own mortality, disease, sickness that's around us, the inhumanity of man towards mankind. And while we are being called to be different, and we're being called to live by kingdom principles, there is still this antagonism with the world in which we find ourselves. That's why, isn't it interesting when you read in verse 11 of Matthew 5, Jesus says, "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." So there is this antagonism, not only because the world itself is broken, but as you and I begin to stand out and begin to really identify ourselves with Jesus and this gospel, in the same way it brought, some persecution to Jesus, it's the same way in which now you and I are going to find yourself in that same kind of situation. We identify ourselves with Jesus, and there is this antagonism then that comes with that because of the of that enmity that exists between this world and this world to come. And it wasn't always meant to be that way. In early parts of creation, everything was at harmony with each other. But it's only when sin enters into the world. And what was that sin? But removing ourselves further and further away from God's will, God's decrees, living life as God has begun to lay it out for us. Men have decided that they're going to go their own way. And the consequence of that is just that it has made this world, just harder and harder. And that's why, again, not just the persecution that we're going to experience by virtue of our association with Jesus. And notice here it says you're going to be persecuted, but it says people will falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Notice that the word there is falsely. We don't want to give people room to criticize us justly. There ought to be this false claim that we're seditious, that we're narrow-minded, that, all kinds of ways, we think you're better than everybody else. You could hear all those kinds of criticisms when those who truly know Jesus recognize, hey, we're just as much a sinner as anyone else. It's just that we have come to recognize that in Jesus, we have one who gives us a solution for that sin, who says, I have come, right, to turn your sin, which is as red as scarlet, and wash you so that you'd be whiter than snow. There is this forgiveness of sin. There is this peace that God brings into a person's life. It doesn't mean that I'm better than anyone else, but the minute you start, allowing this light of Jesus to shine in some pretty dark places, what's the result of that? The result of that is you're going to find yourself persecuted. But verse 12 goes on and says, great is your reward where? In heaven. That's not to say that God doesn't bless us in the here and now, but the full realization of all that's going to take place is not coming until that day in which we see Jesus face to face. Because in that day, all things are going to be made new. Right now, God is doing this work in us. He has given us a spirit, as it tells us in Scripture, not only of revelation, right? The Spirit of God that now rests in you, that opens your mind to all of the good things that God is promising. But that same Spirit is a spirit of power. So it is enabling us to really walk this walk of faith, to be able to then set our minds and our hearts on things above. The Spirit of God is constantly working with us so that we might manifest more and more in this world what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Because it's not by our power, but it's by the power of the Spirit of God that begins to work within us. And I know that sounds mysterious, but it becomes this this guiding, influence in a person's life. And the more you pay attention to that Spirit, you watch how in your ordinary walk, every single day, God's going to make you aware of people around you. He'll give you this little intuition about ways in which maybe you can come alongside and be this person of encouragement or show some acts of compassion and mercy. Sometimes you're going to be doing things and you have no idea the consequence of that action, but because it was spurred on, because you want to be that disciple of Jesus that goes out into the world and demonstrates his love, God orchestrates situations, and then people will come to you and say, you have no idea, but when you called me that day, I was at my wit's end. Or when you showed up and offered to help, that was an answer to prayer. Or out of the blue, somebody gives you a call and you realize, because you have been praying, feeling so alone and so isolated, that you haven't been forgotten, and that God has remembered you, and he uses us in that process. So all I'm trying to really drive home here is that Jesus is speaking to his disciples about the kingdom of heaven, of which it is yet to be fully realized. So it's not about trying to make this world heaven. It's not trying to have such a control over this life that everything is going to work out wonderfully. No, it's just the opposite. And what Jesus is saying in his Beatitudes is that life, it gets pretty messy, but there's coming a time when all things are going to be turned around. Yesterday we talked a little bit about what it meant to be poor in spirit, and how Jesus says you might find yourself in circumstances where you feel your resources are always limited, that you're not really, being as successful as your neighbors. You look around and you got to be careful, right, that we don't become envious of them, of others who have more, because God is also saying that sometimes people put such a trust in the resources that they have forgotten that their real foundation is in God himself. That's why, think about this for a moment. Just think of this whole COVID experience that you and I have been living through. From one day to the next, it has turned upside down people's lives. Who would have ever thought that we would be sequestered in our homes for any period of time, or that businesses would be shut down? Kids can't go to school. Think about how that has come. All of a sudden now you find yourself so dependent on what? On the government for vaccines, for financial assistance. All of a sudden you realize, boy, the kindness of a neighbor, man, it just goes so far. Being able to have resources like the internet. Imagine going through this COVID experience and not having the internet at all. What would you do? You're isolated from neighbor, and now you're isolated from the rest of the world. There's no news coming into your house. If you've ever had a power outage, it all of a sudden makes you realize how dependent you are upon electricity. I remember the first time I moved, in those early, there was a first 18 months or something that I was here in New Hampshire. And first time living in a home, right, where you have your own septic system, you have, a pump for well water, because it's not like I'm living in the city where, you have city sewage and water and all that. No, gas. No, everything now is individualized in your homes here. And in the community in which I live, all the houses are like that. And so you begin to realize, oh yeah, this is so when we had a really severe nor'easter that came, and it knocked out power for over a week. And I remember this mad scramble to just go out and find some water, until a friend of mine said, you do realize you have about 50 gallons of water in your hot water tank. So I wouldn't freak out too much. He says, just go down that water tank and open up the spigot. There's plenty of water there. And I'm like, oh, good thinking, right? But all of which to say, man, you don't realize how dependent you are. My wife and I got into a car just trying to find where we could get gas. We had to drive all the way down to Massachusetts just to find a gas station that was open so that we can fill our tank. And not that we were going anywhere, but it was just this sense of control. Like you just felt so isolated, so vulnerable. You see, this is in reality, that's how we are with God every single day. We are so dependent upon him for the gifts of health and food and so many other things that we attribute to other causes, right? Like we think, oh, it's the strength of my back that I go out and make a living. Yeah, well, let you get sick. Let the business close. Let the clamoring for your particular product dry up. And then talk to me about how you are the captain of your own ship, the master of your own fate. No. We are so dependent on other things around us. And ultimately, God is saying to you and me, we are dependent upon him. And so wherever you find yourself in this, in this food chain, recognize that the day is coming where God says, even for those of you who find yourselves poor in spirit, he says, yours is the kingdom of heaven. In other words, this is not all there is. One day things are going to turn around. Well, there's this passage in Matthew chapter 4, and this is the second beatitude. And the second beatitude says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. If you're ever tempted to think that the blessing comes from the condition itself, here's one that just really just takes that out of any kind of consideration. Because how are you blessed in this sense of mourning? The condition of mourning is not going to make you happy. It's not an enviable position, right? Most of us are trying to find ways in which we are free from this kind of experience. I met a family yesterday again who lost a 24-year-old son to cancer, and we were sharing together about what it means like to move on when you lose a child like that. And we were talking about how you start finding your mind thinking of all the things you're going to be missing out on, like grandchildren, right? Of what they're going to look like when they're older. Now, this one individual shared with me that there was a program on the internet where you can put your child's face on, and then using an algorithm, they would give you an idea of what that child would look like when, let's say, he was like 25 years older. And they started doing that, and they said, we got to stop this, because now we're living in the past. God is asking us to live in the future. And if all the promises that God has made to us are such, like we're reading here in these Beatitudes, that God says, I will bring you comfort, and yours is this kingdom of heaven, right? Then I want to live in that space. I want to live in a space where God is saying, no, I am enough for you now, and I will be more than enough for you in the days to come. And so, my friends, as we look at these passages, the condition is not where the blessing is. The blessing finds itself by you and I being a part of this kingdom that ultimately is going to prevail. And while we have work to do in this life, so that you can't just put your life on hold and just say, okay, I'm just going to forget about everything around me and just, I'm just going to, think about heaven. No. God is saying that because of these promises, it makes what we do in the present even more valuable. It's telling you and me, show up in this world, because why? You and I are fellow workers with God in this work of redemption. As we're going to see in the passages that will come, you and I are the salt of the earth. You and I are the light of the world. We have been given not just titles of commendation, but we have been given responsibility to be the salt, to be the light. So Jesus is just reminding people again, who are those who are really well off? But those who find themselves strengthened with the reality that one day God says all things are going to be made new. So, for instance, you and I, we look at this passage here about mourning, and the blessing is that one day a time is coming when we will be comforted, right? So I want you to, if you would, turn with me in your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 61. This is a great text that I think sheds a little bit of light on what it means to be this mourner. Okay? And what I want you to recognize in this text is that God is speaking to Israel, and they are on the precipice of being judged not only by the Assyrians, which is the nation to the north of them. So they're going to come down into Palestine, and they are going to overrun the northern kingdom. But then from there, what they're going to do, God says he's going to raise up after the Assyrians, the Babylonians. The Babylonians are going to come, and they're going to sweep past, and they're going to not only conquer Assyria, but they're also going to come down, and all of Assyria's allies like Egypt and others that they had aligned themselves to, Babylon is going to come and wipe them out. And then Babylon is going to come and wipe out the city of Jerusalem, Judea, the surrounding region. And these people are going to be taken into exile and dispersed throughout their kingdom. This is not a future that in that moment looks promising at all. In fact, it's in the reality of that judged moment that you get that precious promise that people hang on to all the time from Jeremiah 29:11, where it says, I know the plans I have for you, not to harm you, but to prosper you, to give you a hope in a future. See, that text is given to people who are about to be exiled out into the territories of Babylon, removed from their homes by force. Some of them will be killed. People will be mourning loss, and they're going to be now taken into a foreign land, forced to live there for over 70 years. And then God says, I will open up a door for you to come back. Because why? I know the plans I have for you, not to harm you, but to prosper you. So you see, this is what I'm saying to you, that this world is never going to be heaven. And we have to find ways that we remind ourselves again of that, and not live as somehow or another, if we just do X, Y, and Z, everything will be okay and my life will be at peace and perfect. No, because the world is in conflict. The only hope that we have, the only real strength that we have, is found in our relationship with God through his Son. He's the one that's giving us perspective on how we can live our days now. Because one day, all of this is going to be consumed in this redemptive work that Jesus says, I'm going to make a new heaven, new earth. And in that place, there's not going to be any more pain and suffering. And where does all of that come from? Well, I want you to see, here's this Old Testament passage back in Isaiah chapter 61, where after pronouncing all of this judgment, God takes a moment and says to Israel, who, like I said, is on the precipice, right, of all of this judgment. He's saying to them, okay, look, what I'm telling you is surely going to come to pass, but I want you to understand something, that it's not always going to be like that, which is precisely what Jesus is saying to his disciples in this Sermon on the Mount. Don't look at the present condition you find yourself in, because I am going to turn all of that around. And here he's speaking to those who mourn and saying, you will be comforted. Let me tell you what God said back in Isaiah 61, where we get these words for us now on the mouth of Jesus in the New Testament. Notice Jesus will say these words as he begins his public ministry. These are words that are written down for you in the Gospel of Luke, for instance, where Jesus says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to do what? To preach good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners. Jesus would read these words and says, these words are fulfilled in your hearing. In other words, I am that one who is being promised now. This is 700 years before the birth of Jesus. Jesus comes and reads this passage in Isaiah and says, that's me. I'm the one that's coming to do this very work. And he says, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, the day of vengeance of our God. And notice then he says here in verse 2, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them what? A crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. For they will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins, restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Aliens will shepherd your flocks. Foreigners will work your fields and vineyards. You will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. Instead of their shame, my people will receive a double portion, and instead of disgrace, they will rejoice in their inheritance. And so they will inherit a double portion in the land, and everlasting joy will be theirs. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and iniquity. In my faithfulness, I will reward them and make an everlasting covenant with them. Their descendants will be known among the nations, their offsprings among the peoples. All who see them will acknowledge that they are a people the Lord has blessed. You see this, my friends? This is what God is saying to those who mourn. Their hearts are grieving. They are, it's not just the sense of personal loss, but it's looking at the loss that has happened in the world all around us, how upside down it is. God says, but I got this. There's going to come a day when all of this will be reversed. In the meantime, I'm going to give you my spirit of power so that it'll enable you to work and recognize that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. But that reward is coming. It will be fully realized. So, my friends, we're not to put all our hopes in this world. We're to put our hopes in the world, in the one who is able to make all things new. And in the meantime, minister to us and provide for us in such a way that we are blessed even as we walk in the shadow of death. I think that's a great way to start the day, to seize this day, to recognize that we serve a God of great promise. I hope that encourages you, my friends. It encourages me. I'm fired up. I'm ready to begin this new day. And I hope you also recognize that God is good all the time. My friends, we'll take a look tomorrow at another one of these Beatitudes as we work our way through this Sermon on the Mount. I trust it's a good blessing to you. I hope God begins to speak to your heart and recognize, listen, you might be in a dark place right now. Turn to him. Look to him. God says, I will be that shepherd of your soul. You will not want. I will restore your soul. That's a great promise. Lord willing, we'll have more time tomorrow, and we'll continue our studies together. Appreciate our time being together. I'm in my office this morning. I'm just ready to get to work. Lord bless you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.